Howdy, folks. In today's episode, we'll find out how to create stunning wildlife photography with one of the best in the world, right after this. Welcome to Camera Shake, where we bring you the insider scoop on all things photography and videography, giving you a unique opportunity to stay ahead of the curve. As always, I'm your host, Kirsten Nuts, and before we get into it, I've got one thing to ask of you. I've noticed that over 65% of our viewers on YouTube and listeners on audio are not actually subscribed to this channel. And I've been saying this for quite a long time. It's still 65%. I have no idea why that is. I mean, come on, people. You can really help me out by hitting that subscribe button. It'll help me get even more amazing guests on the show. It's just one click. That's all it takes. Thank you so much. Now, without further ado, though, let's give it up for today's special guest, the award-winning wildlife photographer, Canon ambassador, writer, and photography speaker, Ellie Rothnie. Ellie, how are things?
Hi, Kirsten. Yeah, very good. Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
It's fantastic having you on the show, mainly because I feel wildlife photographers are actually generally underrepresented, I can't even pronounce it, underrepresented on this show. That's one thing. But also, first of all, I mean, your photography is absolutely stunning, and we'll talk about, obviously, we get into that. But I also want to frame this episode in a way that we can, create almost like a little thing, where people can get tips and hints, to improve their own wildlife photography as well. Because I have a lot of friends, both here in the UK and abroad, who love wildlife photography. So, Ellie, just give us a little overview. How did you first get into wildlife photography?
Well, it started really from a very young age, and I know recently quite a lot of people have heard this story. But I was just 8 years old, and I was in the back garden with my dad on a Canon AV1 camera, which is one of the really old film cameras, and we were photographing hedgehogs. And it's as simple as that, and that's where it all started, and Dad taught me the principles of photography, the relationship between shutter, aperture, and ISO, the rest is history, really. I think, so I was terrified of this camera of his because it was his pride and joy, and I was terrified I was going to drop it or break it or something like that, but that never happened. And then it was back in the early 1990s, so 30 years ago now, that I went out to Kenya, and my dad lent me this Canon AV1 camera to take with me in a 300mm lens. Again, it's not like digital is now. It was an old film camera, and you're not quite sure what results you were going to get, with this, or what you were doing. But, when I got home, there's still one image from 30 years ago of a mother elephant and a baby elephant walking in complete sync with each other. And I've still got that as a print, so, and that's, that's where the spark was fired, really. I think we all have somebody in our life who inspires us. And for me, typically, it was my dad. He inspired me with the great outdoors, but also to pick up a camera and to actually record that. So, and then again, 20 years ago, I was back in Kenya. It all seems to happen in Kenya for me, I think. But I met a pro photographer out there just for the day. Our vehicles were parked next to each other, and we were photographing a cheetah out there. And I'd got one of the first Canon digital cameras with me. And he was really curious about this camera because he was still shooting on film. And he'd got one of the big, Canon telephoto lenses. So we put my camera on his lens. And again, that was another, something sort of was turned on again in my psyche. And I thought, gosh, you can do this as a living. Because that's what he did. And this photographer, so modest, so generous with his time, and the photographer is Paul Suders, who is still out there and taking amazing images, So I always thank both my father and Paul Suders, really, for, those key inspirations in my life,
And the hedgehog.
And the hedgehog, yeah, good old hedgehog.
It's funny. It's funny you mentioned hedgehogs because we've actually only a few days ago we had a hedgehog that moved into our carport, and he was sleeping in. We had some cardboard boxes out there, and he obviously made a little nest. So we decided to name him. We called him Hoggins, as in Hedge Hoggins. So Hoggins was out there for a few days, and then he buggered off.
You've got no excuses now, so yeah, get the camera out.
Yeah, I should have taken a picture of him. Oh.
Wildlife.
Do you still have that image of that hedgehog? By the way,
No,
just out of interest.
I don't. No, I don't. Unfortunately, that one's long gone, and I don't know where it ever went. Yeah, but certainly from 30 years ago, of the elephants, I have. Yeah, yeah.
How does shooting wildlife on film, or I should say photographing wildlife, really, how does photographing wildlife on film compare to doing it digitally like we would nowadays?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I think, when you're on a film camera, and especially when you're starting out, which I was at the time, you're very reliant just on trying to, remember what settings to use, and the whole thing, at the time, perhaps seemed like a bit of a headache. I think, and of course you didn't know what really you'd taken until you got those films home and got everything developed. Whereas I think with digital photography now, it's amazing gear, really, isn't it, for self-learning, because it is just immediate, and for example, so when you are starting out with wildlife photography or any genre, and you're using a digital camera, you can just quickly review those images, and that allows you maybe to change your lighting, change your position slightly, maybe even change your lens, or move further back a little bit, or move your composition, change your aperture, so it really is immediate, and probably more, would I say, easier to get those results when you're just on one session, rather than taking everything home and learning that way. So I think the digital revolution is remarkable, really. Just for being able to teach yourself, or even if you're instructing somebody else in a workshop or on a photo trip, just to be able to show your group, what you're seeing, because you can do that on the back of your screen, so yeah, it is remarkable, I think, where we are at the moment. We are in a revolution.
I always think that when I see amazing images, like for instance, you have a lot of images on your website, like high key images of what they call Dalmatian pelicans, for example, which I never knew even existed.
No,
I used to have a Dalmatian dog a little while ago, but
yeah.
But I look at the images like that, and I'm thinking they're absolutely incredible, and then I think like, well, how would you have shot that on film? I mean, I've experimented with film a little bit with a twin lens reflex camera, and I have to say, it is the slowest thing I have ever used. It is so slow to operate, and I'm always thinking like, well, how would you shot wildlife with something like that? Because by the time you're ready to shoot, that whatever animal you were about to shoot, or a bird or whatever, would have long gone.
That's right. I mean, you basically would have been exposing for things like the background, wouldn't you? Or even, with the pelican on the white bird, for example. And you're right, you might have lost that behavior that you were hoping to shoot, so whereas again with the digital cameras now, and the way I shoot high key, I'm in effect overexposing the images, and that's what I'm doing. I'm pushing those whites on the histogram as far to the right as I can get them. But I'm also using the histogram and also things like highlight alert that are all within that camera, just to do a quick check. Have I pushed it far enough, or have I pushed it a bit too far? So I'll bring it back down by a third, or up by another 2/3 of a stop, for example. So again, that's I don't know perhaps how I would have shot those images on an old film camera. Do you know what? I probably need to give this a go. But
I'll join you on that one, because there's a lot I have to learn when it comes to film, photography.
yes,
Um,
well, yeah.
I've always wondered how you actually achieve that sort of that high key, overexposed look, especially in wildlife photography.
Mm.
How do you push the histogram? Do you do it with? Because I'm thinking, is shutter speed the right way to go? Because obviously these animals move potentially, or do you do it with aperture or ISO? How do you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, this is just my personal style, and there are many ways of achieving, with your settings, the same thing. But I shoot a lot in aperture priority, and I do that because I like to control the depth of field, and that's just
Yeah.
my preference. And I actually think it's probably because when I first picked up a camera all those years ago, it was an aperture based camera. The AV1 the Canon AV1 was an aperture
Yes.
based camera. So again, I think in my psyche, I just think in apertures, so what I'm basically doing, is I might be set at f4 because I want a very diffuse foreground and background, and I'm then basically changing the ISO to move my shutter speed, to increase or decrease my shutter speed. But then what I'm doing importantly for high key is the exposure compensation. And I'm taking that to a plus. So cameras will go up to a +3 or a +5. Likewise, if you want to darken images, and do low key photography, you go into the minus part of the exposure compensation. So that's just the way that I've figured out how I do it, and it's just second nature, basically. So but in effect, with the high key, you can't do it all the time. There are some subjects that it won't work, and also a lot of environmental conditions, weather conditions, where this technique doesn't work either. So, in principle, you need an environment that's snowy, icy, foggy, misty, something that is gonna really brighten when you push your exposures. But also I found, the grey skies that we have, that flat grey sky, that's perfect for high key photography. If you can put a subject against that, because you've got what to our eyes looks like a grey canvas, but then you can instruct your camera to give you a white canvas, because you're basically, again, dialing in a positive exposure compensation. So I think the whole technique was just trial and error. And I live, we mentioned I live in mid Wales, and I've got pretty much all year round a field of sheep behind the house. And I actually taught myself a high key technique with these sheep. So
Right.
this is a bit of a, a bit of a confession now, really, isn't it? For a wildlife photographer to work with sheep on something like this. But, there was one winter and it had snowed, and I wanted to just get these sheep in the snow. And it was when I was really first starting, with the whole thing. And I got those images back, loaded them up on the computer. It was one of the, again, digital cameras, and everything looked really grey. And I was like, oh my goodness, what's happened here? So the following year, again, similar conditions. It snowed. There were sheep. There were lambs in the field as well. And I taught myself this whole principle of overexposing the image, because I wanted that snow to look nice and white, and those sheep to look nice and white, and so on. And that's basically where I just sort of perfected the image, or the technique. Really, it was sheep in the snow, and then obviously just took that out into the field thereafter. And I think early on you do get things wrong, don't you? But as we say, with digital, it is quite immediate, and you can just adapt your technique in the field and learn that way. So yeah, and I do find, white birds lend themselves to high key as well. So if you've got those conditions of a white bird against that flat grey sky, which is, or indeed snow, and they're the conditions that those Dalmatian pelicans can be in, for example. That is, that perfect conditions. Big white bird and environmental conditions like that, and that's how you get the high key images.
And of course, over here in the UK, we have plenty of grey skies.
We do,
all
we
year
do.
round.
That's right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, and it's even, on a foggy day, you might think, oh, I'm not going to go out with the camera. Look at this, look at these conditions, look at this weather, but embrace it, because I've taken a lot of gannet images, the northern gannet, and I've just gone, running out on conditions like that when you've got the sea mist or you've got the fog, to photograph those gannets, because again, that fog, with a high key approach, gives you quite a dreamy type of image. Again, with a very beautiful seabird. So, it's those sorts of conditions, just embrace them. Sunny days are actually the worst possible conditions for wildlife photography. Apart from very early in the morning and very late in the evening, of course. But for most of the day, a sunny day is horrible. So
or for any photography, actually, for that matter.
Well, true.
And of course, talking about misty mornings, now is actually the time. I've noticed this only a few days ago. I was driving my wife to work like super early in the morning, and it was all misty and rolling over the hill. And like, okay, summer's definitely over.
Yeah, it is. It's feeling like autumn now, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's really starting to feel like that. You mentioned practicing on sheep, and I think that's a really good piece of advice. It's just practice. Well, obviously practice makes perfect, but just practice on your local wildlife. Where might be a good place for people to go if they're starting out in wildlife photography? What would you recommend?
I would say, local parks. If you're lucky to have a garden or even an area that you can track, garden birds, woodland birds, look to work in that area. So, or definitely a park. You can. It is easy to just walk out from where you are and generally, find some wildlife to photograph, and indeed urban wildlife. That whole category now is very popular now. With urban foxes, badgers, birds of prey, and so on. So wildlife is coming, back into urban areas as well. So, and they make really interesting photographs because there's an urban building, but then you've got a beautiful fox in that scenario. So but definitely start out locally. I started in the back garden with that hedgehog. But I've still done a lot of work actually just around where I live, because I can walk and I can go into a field and put up a pop-up hide, for example, and just be able to get local jays and long-tailed tits and those sorts of species, woodpeckers and so on, down to a sort of a perch that I've put up with a pop-up hide. So you don't have to travel really to start this. So I'd very much encourage people to actually just look at what they've got in their local area. There's a lot of local nature reserves, aren't there, as well? Parks have grey squirrels. There's nothing wrong with grey squirrel. So that's what I'd advise.
It's funny you mentioned foxes, because I know quite a few of our listeners from abroad would probably be puzzled in thinking that we have foxes living in the cities, but it's totally true. Where I live, I'm really surprised how many foxes are in the neighborhood. I had some in my front garden. I see them in the park all the time. As soon as the sun comes down, they seem to be coming out. And they sound very bizarre. They're very curious. They actually follow you around sometimes. That's what I notice.
Yeah. They're. I mean, I hear them here, but obviously, they're in the woods,
Mm.
but yeah, at night, certainly when they're trying to attract mates and this sort of thing, they're mating. They sound like banshees, don't they? And
Yeah.
I think the first you hear that, it's like, my goodness, what is this? So, but yeah, remarkable animals, to be honest.
Hey, let me just jump in real quick to tell you about the amazing sponsor of this episode, Platypod. Platypod offers innovative camera support systems designed to unleash your creativity. With their stable, versatile, and portable solutions, you can capture stunning shots like never before. And I'm not just saying that. As the host of the Camera Shake podcast, I can personally vouch for Platypod's incredible products. They've become an integral part of the show. In fact, I'm surrounded by various Platypod products holding up lights, cameras, microphones, and so on. It's really helped to transform the way I make the show and the way I shoot at home, in the studio, and on location. But don't just take my word for it. Explore Platypod's website at www.platypod.com to discover their range of products, including the Platypod Extreme, Platypod tripod heads, and the brand new handle, of course. Make sure to follow Platypod on Instagram and Facebook at Platypod Tripods for exclusive updates, tips, and giveaways. By choosing Platypod, you're not only investing in your photography, but you're also supporting the Camera Shake Photography Podcast. Thanks again to Platypod, our amazing sponsor. Platypod, where innovation never sleeps. I had a weird face-off with a badger not too long ago, last year. So imagine this, right? I'm driving up my road, and there are lots of speed humps, so you have to go relatively slowly. It was relatively late at night, and as I turned my head over to the side, I just noticed this badger walking along the sidewalk, parallel to my car at exactly the same speed. And just as I turn my head and I see him, he turned his head and he sees me, and our eyes meet, and we both realize, I'm thinking, oh, a badger, and he's probably thinking, oh, some guy, And then every time, there were some cars parked along the side of the road, and so he would disappear behind a car, and then he would reappear in the gap between two cars. And every time he'd reappear, he'd look over and I look over, and so we're like facing off against each other for about 100 yards or something. It was the most hilarious thing, until we got to this crossroads, and he just turned left and waddled off. And all I could see was his bum like disappearing in the distance. It's really funny. When you start looking, it's really amazing what kind of wildlife you can find, even if you're in a fairly urban area.
That's right.
We're right on the line here.
That's right. And some of my colleagues have done remarkable photography with pigeons, for example, because they're living down in London, and they're just photographing, quite creatively, pigeons again in their back garden. So, so I think wherever you look, you're absolutely right. Wherever you look, there is wildlife, and let's not forget about macro as well, because we do have butterflies, we have bugs, you just go and have an explore of a plant, turn the leaf up, very gently, I guarantee you'll find something, to photograph. It doesn't have to be a badger or a fox or indeed a bird. You can look at the smaller animals as well. So
absolutely. And if you want to see some really amazing macro or bug photography, or spiders, check out the episode a few weeks ago where I spoke to Stuart Wood, who is an absolute master in photographing, in particular, spiders. I've learned so much about spiders. I can't believe it. Unbelievable. It's definitely worth checking out.
No, I'm not sure about the spiders. That's the one thing.
That's what I thought.
I'm quite happy photographing snakes, but I take a deep breath when it's a spider. But yeah, I will check that out.
When you mentioned photographing wild animals in Kenya, what's your favorite environment to be in to photograph animals?
In terms of, I mean, I do prefer to be out in the animal's habitat. So for example, I do some hide photography where it's necessary. For example, if you know my work, I love red squirrels as well. So I go up to Scotland every year to photograph our red squirrels, and that has to be in a hide, because they're not habituated animals, and they they'd be fearful of you as a human. So you need, we're not protecting ourselves for safety with that one. We're just putting ourselves, behind some form of screen so that, they know we're there, but they're not fearful, and they can behave very normally and very naturally. My preference is to actually just be out in those habitats, so whether that's walking, or Kenya, for example, and other countries as well. You're going to be in a vehicle, and that's for the safety of both the animal and for yourself. Um, but I think, when you are out, you can be a lot more adaptable. You can just move yourself a little bit, or you can move with the light and so on. So hides are fantastic, and I do enjoy working in a hide. But I just find the flexibility sort of is my preference. So that's why I prefer to be out and about, really.
And of course, there are plenty of hides, especially here in the UK, that are already established where you could just go and hang out and
That's
sit and
right.
wait for an animal.
That's right.
I'm guessing, especially when we're talking about environments like Kenya, for example, and you just mentioned, there are situations where you may have to stay inside of a car for safety reasons. I'm guessing that there's a lot of research and preparation that has to go into a trip like that.
Mm.
How do you approach that?
I'll always recce. So I think it all starts with, there are certain destinations and locations that, and indeed species that you've always really wanted to go to and always wanted to photograph there. And I guess that's where it all starts. And there's in preparation for a trip where you're actually responsible for taking people out there. That photographer prior to that has recce'd that site many times. So probably not with a view of taking a group of photographers there. More in terms of, you're out there and thinking, do I think this might actually work. I think I know some people who might want to come with me one day and join a group and photograph here. But always a lot of preparation, Kirsten, actually, both in terms of, just being in those locations and taking those images. But then you're looking, if you think there's an idea for a trip there, you're then looking at all the logistics of, accommodation, safety, is it going to be quite dependable, in terms of the photography, even down to, what's the food like?
Most important thing for me.
Yes, are there flights available anywhere nearby, and this sort of thing. So you're just looking at the full logistics basically before you even think about costing this up and putting together an itinerary and then starting to market that. So but there's a lot of places that I go, and I'd say a lot of my colleagues go to, that we don't run trips there. We go there and we do our own photography, and we keep it that way. So.
Because I also think, and again, you sort of you mentioned that a little bit. It's really important to know that there is something to photograph there, because rocking up at a place and then there are no animals there. That's slightly disappointing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so I'm guessing you need to do a lot of research also specifically into the species and their particular habits that you're planning on photographing.
Absolutely, and it's a good point, because there's always or there's generally a seasonality to a lot of species as well. So you need knowledge of those species, and also to work out the best times of year to go, because you don't want to go and photograph bears, in November, for example, because they'll be hibernating. There's no point. That's a silly example, but that is just around
Yeah.
the species and the seasonality. So there are always peak times of year to go and see certain species, and also certain behaviours as well. So yeah, it's a very good point.
What's your favorite place in the world to photograph animals?
Uh, it's a really difficult one, but if you said to me, if you only had one more place that you could travel to photograph, where would that be? And that would be to go back to Kenya. And I am so lucky with my job to be able to travel with my camera to some of the most incredible locations on earth, really. And I do pinch myself, because I see some incredible, behaviors and animals, and that you just think, I'm not going to see that again. But if there was only ever one place, it would be back to Kenya. And why is that? I don't know. I just I think I think that place just gets into your blood, and the first time I ever went there, more than 30 years ago, that was it. The magic was there, and I've been going back regularly ever since, really, and to the same locations and exploring new areas. And you just make a lot of friends there, don't you? When you leave to come home, you always leave part of your heart in that country. And I'm sure we all feel, very similar feelings about different countries or different locations. And for me, it just happens to be Kenya. It's about the people. It's about the wildlife that they have. It's about how they're doing their best to conserve their wildlife. Nowhere's perfect, but they really are doing their best. They haven't got trophy hunting, for example, which is there in other countries. So there are, just it's the whole package, really, for me. And whenever I'm there, I might be photographing lions again, and I've photographed them hundreds of times before, but you'll always just see something different. As long as those animals are relaxed with your presence, and you're quiet and you're calm, and you're just enjoying being there with them, they will show you their own behavior. And you just see and photograph some beautiful things, like the interactions between lionesses and cubs, and how they all play together, and how they then interact with the males, and you get that with so many different animals. If your approach with them is just very calm and very quiet, and clearly you're not within their sort of fear zone. They're comfortable. They know you're there, but they're just comfortable with this. And so I'd go back there tomorrow, any day. And that would be my last ever trip. Have I
Awesome.
sold it to you? I don't know, but there you go. I didn't mention the light either, because you get remarkable light there too. And it's in many locations, it's the country of the big sky. So beautiful country.
What fascinates me about wildlife photography in particular is that you're documenting, the wildlife, or the state of the wildlife at that particular point in time. And I wonder, and this is something I wanted to ask you, if you go back to a place like Kenya, for example, over decades, do you notice any changes in the environment there? I'm thinking about, changes caused by, let's say, either human interaction or things like climate change, for example. Have you noticed anything like that happening?
I have. And again, it was remarkable, really, being in Kenya literally just before the pandemic, and then pretty much being one of the first travellers to go back there in 2021, when there was a little window to travel again. And I went back. And even in that time, you could see changes. What I would say is one of the biggest if you like, pressures that the wildlife has there, and indeed the people, but it's that human wildlife conflict. So,
Hmm.
it is the need for resources and the need for land for grazing and so on that, the wildlife also needs those spaces too as part of its habitat. A lot of animals have huge ranges, and so the conflict between humans and between wildlife now, you are seeing this. I think every time you go into Nairobi, for example, that city's changed as well. It's ever growing, it's ever getting more and more urban, and I think back to how it was even 30 years ago. So yes, you do see these changes everywhere. What I'd say too, not just Kenya, but just generally, the weather seems to be a lot more unpredictable too.
Hmm.
um so it's there, isn't it? It's like I say, you try and go to a certain place, because it's of its seasonality, and how that then affects animal behavior because of those seasons. But if there are changes in those weather patterns and hence in those seasons, there are changes in the behaviors as well. So as a photographer, it's never boring, is it? As a photographer, that's one way to look at it, because
Yeah.
you can go to these places, and you can always guarantee it's going to be different, and in a way that's a wonderful thing. It depends how you look at it, but yes, to answer your question, yeah, I am seeing changes over the years, yeah, and some unpredictability, and also just the conflicts really, between man and wildlife.
And I think the beauty of wildlife photography in that sense is also that as a photographer you sort of become a preservationist at the same time, because you have that unique ability or that unique power to convey all of that to an audience many thousands of
Yeah.
miles away, who may not
Yeah.
necessarily be aware of the impact of these environmental changes in a place as far away as Kenya, Southern Africa, Asia, or whatever. And I think
Yeah.
that's always that's a super powerful message within that. Um, and that's something that really fascinates me every time I look at wildlife photography, because I always
Mhm.
wonder, are we still going to be able to see those things are my children going to be able to see this in 30, 40, 50 years time? That's the thing.
It's a really sad thought, Kirsten,
Mm.
and it makes me feel really sad that, yeah, generations in the future, won't be able to, or might not be able to see these animals. So, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
it's such a sad thought.
it's
Another area that I do like to focus on. Going back to these Dalmatian pelicans, really. So, you know, there's a good conservation story with those birds, and again, that's another positive story to tell. That of local, where local initiatives are really making a difference. And so I've been documenting those pelicans for 15 years now. And they've had their challenges, they've had their ups and downs. They've had bird flu, they've had some winters where it was remarkably cold, and those pelicans are not built for temperatures of minus 15 degrees. So bird flu, for example, a couple of years ago, killed 50% of the population at this particular location. But again, because of local initiatives, and where the breeding is supported, and basically they're in no-go zones during the breeding seasons and so on. Those populations do come back, and so there's just there's a positive story with this, and I guess this is one area that I like to focus on is to show some of those local initiatives, because if we each and every one of us do our own little bit added together, that is huge, because otherwise, when you think about climate change and you think about what's happening, you feel so small, and you feel like you can't do anything as an individual. Whereas actually, when you focus on the smaller things and make the differences there, they really do add up and can make something very great. So I've tended to focus on local projects like that as well.
And again, just purely from a, if we look at this like purely from a, marketing perspective, let's say, then those are exactly the stories that need to be told, because that will then, hopefully, to get the snowball rolling down the hill, when more people get involved in either taking part in projects like that, or at least, show concern and support, for things like that. I remember not too long ago, not too long ago, it was last October, I had the opportunity to photograph sea eagles in northern Norway in the Lofoten Islands.
Lovely.
It was one of the most, it was one of the most amazing experiences among many really, incredible experiences up there. But we were out on a speedboat in various fjords photographing these seagulls. It was incredible. It's incredible to see these animals in their natural environment, first of all. Also, absolutely mind-blowing how large these birds actually are.
They are,
That's incredible. Plus I realized that I really have to go and work out because those lenses are heavy.
Yeah, they are, aren't they?
Unbelievable. It's like literally, I tell you, after 10 minutes of shooting, I felt like I could barely lift it up to my waist level. And I could just, I felt like a machine gunner. Just like going up, there's a bird. Okay, I'm just going to aim roughly. That's just...
and it's always quite an experience, isn't it? Holding those lenses and then also photographing on a boat too, because when the boat might go up and you think you've got your bird in the frame and you just capture its tail, so it's quite funny, It's but that's amazing. I mean, those seagulls are incredible up in Norway, and I've photographed them many times, and beautiful, as you say, they're beautiful birds. And I've also seen them in Japan, but alongside another species called the Steller's sea eagle. Now that is one huge bird, and you can get images of the white-tailed eagle and the Steller's sea eagle next to each other, and you just see, they make your sea eagle look quite small in comparison, So, but they're beautiful, really beautiful birds.
They're really incredible. It was incredible seeing them, in their, like I said, in their national heritage. So it was really, really fun. Half the time, I almost forgot to photograph them because I was so fascinated by by their behavior. Like the fact that when we turned up in our little speedboat thing, there was one eagle that came and checked us out. Almost like a scout, just scouting out the boat to see what's going on. And then he relayed the message to the rest of the gang to say that that we're not a threat and we have fish in a bucket. So, they all came.
Ingredient.
Yeah.
That's remarkable. I'm glad you enjoyed that experience. Anyway,
it was. I mean, I'll never forget it. It was a fantastic day. It was incredible to see those animals. I have one or two decent photos of it, I think. But. And I mentioned that the lenses are sometimes incredibly heavy. I mean, I was shooting like 400 plus whatever it was. I think it's a 400 to 600. I can't remember. I have to ask my friend Dave. It's his lens. Anyway, let's talk about gear a little bit, because I know a lot of listeners will be interested in that. When it comes to wildlife photography in general, what's the general basic gear that you need to go out and photograph some wildlife?
Yeah. That's a really good question. And when I first started seriously, one of the first lenses I bought was actually the 1 to 400 mil. So I've always shot with Canon, as you know. So it was one of their lenses, and this was on the on I think it was the 300D. So it was
Oh,
a
well,
really
okay.
we're going back quite a long way now. And I was down in a local hide down in Welshpool, and there was a guy in there who got the Canon 500 mil, and it was a little hide that was on a lake, and you've got reed warblers and geese and this sort of thing there. And we got talking. He said, "Oh, I'll just have a go with this lens." So yeah, that's a mistake, isn't it? You put this lovely 500 mil telephoto lens on your camera, and oh my goodness, that was sold. So I came back home and counted the money in my piggy bank basically, and went and bought it. So, and that was the 500 mil Mark One, which I've still got. It's a stunning lens, and it is at least 15 years old now, Kirsten, that lens, which is just testament to the build quality, basically, because it's been everywhere with me. On boats for those eagles, in Norway, for example. It's been to Japan and America and Africa and Europe and the UK, and it's been in the back garden and absolutely everywhere. And it's just never let me down. And I still got it, and I still do use it from time to time. It's always been my go-to lens. And I think, that is the key with wildlife, really, those lenses really is so that you can be within the animal's comfort zone. You're not sort of on a wide angle and getting so close that the animal is fearful of you, for example. So that was always really the approach with those bigger telephoto lenses, was to keep your distance but still be able to get lovely images of the detail and what have you of those animals. Having said that, it's always good to have a wide angle and a mid-range lens as well, so something like a 24-70 millimeter lens and a 70-200, because it's also good to show the animal in its environment, for example. And of course, if you're photographing elephants, you don't want them on a 500 mil lens. You actually might want them on a 24-70 or a mid-range. So that's been my approach really right from the start. As I say, I counted my money in my piggy bank for that 500 mil, but then I did have a 24-70 and a 70-200, and those were my staple lenses, really, teamed up with a camera.
So would you say, for anybody who's starting to think about getting into wildlife photography, would you say it's definitely a better idea to invest into glass rather than the camera body?
It's a really interesting thing to say. Somebody said this to me years and years ago, was invest in glass. And I think, as the years go on, you look back and you can see that, invested in a lens more than 16 years ago, and it's still amazing now as it was when I got it out of the box. So when you look at the economics of that was a really good investment to me, because the technology in the cameras does change, but you get some really good glass, and that's gonna take you a long way, and you'll get many years of enjoyment out of something like that. So they're obviously, looking at telephoto lenses, it really is a big investment. And what I'd always suggest is just hire one to start off with. If you just want to hire one for a week, 2 weeks, try it out, see if it suits you, the size, the weight, the types of images you're going to get with that, because you don't need you don't need all the gear. Do you see? It's like, just for me, with that 500 mil lens, I always knew what that lens was going to do for me. what I was going to achieve with that lens. That's the relationship that you have with your gear, I think. So, you don't need to invest in lots and lots and lots of lenses. You can just decide what is it you want to do, and then the lenses then follow. But as I say, if you're looking for as a general approach, wide angle, one mid range, and one telephoto is a good approach. Yeah.
And that's of course pretty much true no matter what type of photography you shoot. I always say, investing into glass makes a lot more sense than investing into lots of camera bodies, because from my experience as a portrait photographer, I shoot portraits, but I also quite regularly shoot event type things, and so I have like a set range of lenses that I use all of the time. But whenever there's anything specific that I need, it's like you say, hiring makes a lot of sense, because for me, spending several £1,000s, for instance, on a particular lens that I really only use once a year doesn't make a lot of sense, in that respect. I'm just thinking, you mentioned 24-70. The 24-70 for me is the bread and butter lens. That's literally on my camera virtually almost, I would say, 85% of the time, because I use it for video, I use it to shoot this podcast, I use it for all sorts of different things. And I've had that lens, let me see, for at least 10 years. And I bought it secondhand when I bought it. And it was already old when I bought it. And so, and despite the fact that everything's moved from DSLR to mirrorless, and, you can still use adapters and they work absolutely perfectly fine. So, if there was one lens, if I was to buy a new lens, I wouldn't actually buy a different lens. I would upgrade that lens. I'll tell you for one reason. That is because I shot an event a few months ago. Where was it? Oh, it's at the Albert Hall. Yeah. And I hired a number of camera bodies and a set of lenses, and one of them was the brand new Nikon Z series 24-70 lens. And I thought, oh, cool, I'll try that out because I know the old version really well. Let's just see what that does. And it really was incredible, the difference, that made the autofocus was a lot faster. It was just like, I was thinking, okay, rather than like buying a brand new lens, that would be the one I probably would be upgrading to.
Yeah.
But
and I absolutely, and it's the lenses that suit what you're doing, isn't it? You basically decide what is it you want to focus on, so for example, I do a lot of animal portraits. So for me, again, telephoto lenses are just beautiful for that, because I can achieve an f2.8 or an f4 in terms of aperture, just to get those lovely milky backgrounds and foregrounds. And then I can go in quite close on a bird, for example, just the head and so on. So but yeah, absolutely, it's deciding. My advice would always be decide what it is that you want to do, and then you then invest in those lenses, or hire those lenses, or even borrow them. I'd see if there are any friendly friends out there who might just let you borrow a lens for a trip or a weekend or something like this. So there's lots of ways of doing it.
That's always a great opportunity when you're a member of a camera club, for example, because there's going to be somebody who shoots the same brand that you shoot, and it's always going to be somebody who probably has that lens that you might want to try out. It's always a great opportunity and environment to just say, can I borrow this lens? After many times of borrowed lenses, left, right, and center, of friends and colleagues, just for a one-off thing. It might be a job. It might be just something that I like to experiment with, or I just want to try it out, I'm thinking like, I've never used this. Fairly recently, actually, it was macro lenses, didn't really have that much experience with macro lenses. And there was a project where I thought, okay, so 105 macro, I think would work really well here, but I don't have one, right? So I went and I borrowed one off of a friend, and I used it. It worked brilliantly, absolutely beautifully. And based on that, I decided, okay, well, actually, because I'm going to be shooting a lot more of this thing, it's worth spending the money and buying a lens. What's your sort of go-to kits? Like if you were to leave for Kenya tomorrow, what would be your lenses of choice in your kit?
I would definitely take. So again, we're talking the Canon kit. So I would have a 1-500 in there because I like the flexibility of being able to zoom in and out. And I would also have one of the prime telephotos, and the one I normally take out there with me is a 400mm with a 1.4 extender, and that is my go-to kit basically. I might just pop in a wide angle as well, and sometimes I kick myself when I don't. Because you can guarantee you get a wide angle opportunity with an elephant or something like this. But a 24-70, the one I do travel with a lot, and the reason is it's so small and it's a pretty creative lens. But it was the Canon fisheye 15mm, and it's really small, and they don't make it anymore. However, you can pick them up in the secondhand market. They are still out there. And it's small, you can even just put it in your pocket. And I love that lens. So if I haven't taken something like a 24-70, but I get this little fisheye out, and I've used that a lot, for example, in Kenya, because you can actually straighten your horizon. It does that lovely spherical, so if you're on a boat or up high somewhere and you can look down and you see the sphere, but likewise you can just re-angle your camera and get a flat horizon, and you're shooting at 15mm. So that is a little one that I travel a lot with, so it's a good fun lens. Yeah
That's it. I think everybody needs that sort of favorite little lens. I have an 85 mil lens that I love. I just love the look that it gives me, especially in portraits. It's because there isn't, you're very pleasing sort of face distortion that's not really currently, let's say, even call it distortion, but it just creates a very pleasing look in portraiture. And I just love that lens. It's not even a very expensive lens. It's actually a 1.8 mil plastic, fantastic. But it's great, and I rarely ever shoot at 1.2. So, what's the point? It's always the thing. You have that favorite lens.
You do. Yeah, you do. Yeah. I think, I mean, again, this is just indicative of my style of photography. But, if I only had one lens, it would be one of the prime telephotos that I'd take with me. Over and above just one wide angle or one fisheye or one macro, something like that. So, if I could only take one lens, then it would be one of the telephotos. But yeah, ideally you want the little ones in your bag as well. So.
Yeah. And if you were starting out in wildlife photography and you could only afford one lens, what would be the one lens you would recommend somebody would get?
Oh my goodness, what a good question. I would really go for a 1-500mm as the first lens that I was going to invest in. Yeah, because I think you getting a flexibility with something like that, and you can really try out different things with a lens like that, and also shoot different subjects. So yeah, if that was the first one, and obviously I'd be looking at my piggy bank and things like that. I think I'd go for the 1-500. I'm only thinking back to when it all started for me quite seriously, and the 1-400 was the first one that I bought. So if we follow the same principle, it'd be the 1-500 now, which is one of the mirrorless. It's an RF mirrorless lens. Yeah.
And as I say, if in doubt, you can always sell a child. If you need to buy a new lens.
Well, exactly.
That's always that. I got 3 of them.
There you go. You've got a lot. Yeah.
That's it. I can buy all 3 lenses.
Yeah, you can afford a lot of kit.
Okay, so 1-500. It's very versatile lens. And again, it's always worth looking on the second-hand market. Nothing wrong with that. I bought many. In fact, no, I have bought lenses from new, but I've bought many lenses second-hand. I have to admit, and they've served me very well. Let's talk about camera bodies. You're a Canon ambassador. Let's talk about camera bodies first, but then I also want to dive into how you came about being a Canon ambassador. But okay, so let's talk camera bodies. Canon's had a few really awesome new additions to their range of camera bodies recently. What's your, I'll say, weapon of choice, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, well, I've been for a number of years. I was using the 1DX cameras, the 1DX Mark 1 and the 1DX Mark 3. And prior to that, it was the 1D Mark 2, 3 and 4. I've had a 5D Mark 4. So in terms of those digital cameras, and of course the 300D when it all started, so but it was over a year ago now, so probably 15, 16 months ago, I did go mirrorless, and I bought the R3, the EOS Mark R3. So that was me venturing into mirrorless cameras basically. So and like you say, you can still put your old lenses onto the mirrorless cameras using an adapter. So but I've never really looked back, to be honest, so I still travel with a 1DX Mark III as a backup, but it gets more and more difficult as you sort of invest into your mirrorless lenses, because obviously you can't put them back onto those older cameras. So you find yourself, when you are going on a trip and you're limited with weight, I'm going out with mirrorless now, so the bodies and the lenses, and then you're just working with the same system. So and the new launches this year are absolutely incredible. And I was lucky last month to be able to take the R1. It was a pre-production model, and I took that out to Kenya. So I had that camera for 3 weeks, and I was lucky with it.
Oh, amazing.
And I enjoyed that camera a lot. I really experimented with it. I was trying lots of things, because I guess you're comparing a lot, when you pick up a new model like that, and you're comparing it with what I know already, which was the R3. And I was super impressed with the R1, with the whole AF system, and the animal tracking, the eye detection. I got sort of photo friends messaging me saying, "Ellie, can you test it on leopards?" And it's like, well, of course I will, if we find a leopard, but things like zebra, what I call the zebra test, because some mirrorless cameras get a bit confused with the stripes on a zebra, and the eye detection is quite inaccurate. So I was just experimenting on that sort of those animals really, and it went straight. The eye detection worked on a zebra. There you go. It's out there.
That's one of the things that has floored me for years, actually, especially when it comes to Canon's eye detection. I remember testing. There was I think it was the R5 a year or 2 years ago maybe. It was a black dog, a black eye of a black dog in the dark.
Yes.
And I couldn't even see that. I couldn't even see that eye myself. It's like, how the hell the camera actually figured out that there was an eye there beats me to this day. But yeah, absolutely stunning. In comparison to the camera that I use most of the time, whereby like even an earlobe all of a sudden turns into an eye for some reason. I don't know what that's all about, but But yeah,
I've found, sort of with the mirrorless. So for example, photographing snakes was a classic. So I do this every year, out in Bulgaria, and I work with herpetologists there, and we take small macro groups with us and photographs reptiles and amphibians, and I was finding, that for example, my R3 at the time was getting a bit confused with snakes and the eyes of the snake. And I got it on animal tracking, detection. So I switched this on to people and it worked, So it's, I think that's what you have to do, at the end of the day, the cameras, they're so powerful, they're giving you so much technology, and you just have to experiment. You have to get in them, don't you, and just experiment with all those menus and different combinations, and really just find out what works for you and what works with the subjects that you're photographing, and not be afraid to experiment, really. So but yeah, the R1, just phenomenal, and even things like the pickup in low light or low contrast, and the tracking, that was so accurate for me as well. So it's yeah, I can't wait to sort of be able to try it again. It's yeah, I'm looking forward to this, to be able to take it somewhere again. So
How has the way you shoot changed moving from DSLR to mirrorless, or has it changed at all?
not for me, no. There are certain things, I think, when you do use a mirrorless system, that there are certain things, to get from A to B in terms of the style of your shooting. It can be a little bit different how you do that within the camera, and you just like I say, you just experiment and learn with that, really. So but in terms of my approach and the types of images that I like to create, with the camera, the mirrorless systems haven't changed, really. I mean, I do actually do a lot of action photography, but I guess it's the way that you curate your own images, and I don't put a lot of those out there. And I also do a lot of multiple exposures, for example. And when I'm using macro, I'm photo stacking. So I'm using all of that capability within the camera, but I don't necessarily put that work out into the public domain, because it's just how I choose to, like I say, just to show a certain type of work that I do. So yeah, I don't think it's changed. It's just perhaps how you do it within the mirrorless system is just slightly different to what you were used to.
It's actually interesting. You mentioned the way you curate your images, because I know you have a marketing background. Is it the marketer coming through saying like, "Well"?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, for many years, and yeah, I mean, yeah, that's really, it has influenced the way I approach my photography, for sure, and the type of image, as I say, that I like to take, because I mean, yeah, marketing isn't just about the comms, is it? It's about your products and everything else, but it still is a very image led area. But basically, the importance of images, that's the thing that stops us in our tracks. If you can have a really impactful image, and then you read your headline, you read your copy, and you're engaged, and then you want to go and find out more about it. So images, and indeed video, that's the first thing, really, that our brains recognize, and so I guess that's one of the principles that you just have with you. And then yeah, you've worked like that in a previous life, and you work like
Yeah,
that now, basically. So
yeah, that's
but
the thing.
working in marketing and working in the commercial worlds really helped me, Kirsten, because when you do sort of go full time, and I did that 8 years ago. So I mean, prior to that, if anybody didn't know, then I was working in marketing, but then I was also building a photography business at the same time. And then 8 years ago, I made that switch full time into wildlife photography. But all the skills that you learn, from working in a different area completely, all those sorts of skills, managing your finances, cash flow, marketing, looking at your pricing, all those things, even making your tea, just all the admin that goes behind absolutely everything that you do. They set you up well to then run a photography business, so my previous life's been really helpful. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
People tend to forget that, very often when they think of like, being a professional photographer, it really means running a business. And so a large part of what you do on a day-to-day basis really doesn't have very much to do with photography. It has a lot to do with all the other business stuff that you have to do, from writing invoices, which is what I'll be doing tomorrow. It's not terribly exciting, but it's one of these things, but it has to be done. So how did you make that switch from being a marketing professional into professional photography? Was that like you hear a lot, I mean, there's different philosophies when it comes to that. You have on the one hand, you have the you do it as a sort of a side hustle, and then you grow that, and when you're ready, then you ditch the main job. But you also hear a lot of people talk about the burn the boats philosophy, where you just basically cut yourself off from everything else, and then you just throw yourself into it, high risk, I would say. Yeah. But how did you approach that?
Well, I was running both careers, if you like, in parallel, basically, and then it really got to a crunch point where I'd committed more. I was using my vacation in my marketing job to basically work in wildlife photography and guide, for example, guiding those trips. So I was probably guiding at that time 2 or 3 trips a year, and I'd be using my vacation to do that. So in effect, I didn't really have a holiday, not a traditional holiday. For me, a holiday was working and taking a group to a location really to photograph. So as I say, it was about 9 years ago now, and I did reach a crunch where I just thought I can't do any more now than I am doing, and I really wanted to, and I just wanted to see where it would go, because it is a different path to follow, isn't it? And it is a different journey. And my attitude was really, well, if I don't do it now, I never will. And so so I did leave, but I left the doors open. And my boss at the time said, well, if you want your old job back, just come, and I think that is the key, knowing that, that did give me the confidence that I did have a safety net, that, in 6 months' time or in 12 months' time, if it just wasn't working out, then I could go back and knock on the door and go back and work in an office in marketing, but I've never looked back, to be honest. And I do think you do have to think on your feet, and it's you can't look at it with rose tinted spectacles, really, because you do have some times that are incredible and you're so elated, and then you have other times where you're thinking, my goodness, what you really do just have to pick yourself up from the knockdowns, so I guess it's like a lot of life, isn't it? And wildlife photography is no different. You just need the tenacity. Self-belief is a difficult one, because I think as photographers, we're always beating ourselves up about our work. We always think we can take it better, or we're picking out something really small in that image that we don't like, that probably nobody else is ever going to notice, so I think as photographers generally, we can actually be quite self-critical, and we are sensitive souls, so but yeah, I think it's just you do have knockdowns, and you just pick yourself up, dust yourself down, and off you go again, it's hard, isn't it? I didn't set out, when I went full time 8 years ago, to say, right, in 6, 7, 8, 10 years, this is what I want to be. I just approached it in terms of I would just want to be the best that I can be. And I want to take those photographs for myself. I'm doing it because I absolutely love it. I love photography. I love being outdoors. I love wildlife. So for me, the chance to do that was bringing all those things together. That's something I was so passionate about. And I think if you've got that passion, you can do anything. You just got to, like I say, you've got to ride with it and then pick yourself up from the knockdowns, and at the time, yeah, I just wanted to see what I could do, really. That was it.
Yeah, I think passion is a phenomenal driver
Yes.
for something like a career in photography,
Well,
because I would find it, because it's in part it's a creative field, and so I would find it very difficult personally. Being a relatively creative person, I would find it very difficult to keep on going if
yeah.
I didn't have that passion engine driving me forward, all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's, if you're thinking about getting into, if anybody listening or watching, if you're thinking about getting into professional photography, or at least making that your job, you do need to have that passion fuel that fuels your engine to drive you forward, through that. And despite what people say sometimes, I actually do believe there's never a wrong time, to do that. It's you see it especially on YouTube or something, you see a lot of videos like, you can't have a career as a professional photographer anymore in 2024. And I always think like, well, yes, you can. It's
Yeah.
it's just it's just as difficult, because somebody said the same thing in 1985.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, there is a lot of competition, for sure, and there's a lot of people taking images, but I see that as a positive, because that just shows a greater engagement in the
Yep.
industry. That's how I view it, really. So, but I think it's my philosophy has always been do it for myself, because I think if you're taking images with somebody else in mind, that's where you can get quite frustrated. Whereas what I've found is when I'm doing it for myself, I'm feeling it. I hope this makes sense.
Absolutely.
But I'm just feeling it, and it is from the heart, and it feels right. And so I carry on. Doing that, and that's how I guess that I've developed my own style. We talked early on about the whole approach with high key photography, and for me, that approach and the results from those techniques feel right for me, and so you just carry on doing that. I'm not doing that for anybody
Yeah.
else. I'm doing it because I like it, and
Yeah.
that is really what this is all about.
Yeah.
And you can do this. You can do it as a job, because that is how you find your own creative style. You do have to stand out. You have got to go out and do your own thing and show your own creativity. And there will always be people out there who will like what you're doing.
Yeah.
Always, you can't please everybody, can you? In any
Exactly.
walk of life. So I think if you do it from yourself, and you've got the passion and you do it from the heart, you've got to go out there and tell people what you're doing, obviously, and go through the channels and so on. But that's always been my approach, really, and that's how I stay happy with this.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, it's one of these things. Actually, I completely, entirely, and absolutely agree with you. And it's really true in no matter which genre of photography you're in. I mean, this might be headshots. Like in my case, I do a lot of headshots.
Mhm.
So, the thing about this is, to me, I love taking portraits. So
Mhm.
by extension, I actually love headshots. I love the lighting.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
everything about it. I love the storytelling aspect of it. Depending on whether it's a professional or whatever, and you're trying to sort of tell a subliminal story with that image as to like what position are they in? Are they a managing director, or are they, working in the office? What profession are they in? Are they a lawyer or a doctor, for example, or a nurse, or whatever it may be? So the way you light somebody, the way you post somebody, really can tell a massive story, when it comes to that. And I just like doing that. I like creating that. So that, to me, that's fun. And
Yes.
And I used to practice on friends and family forever and ever and ever and ever, and myself actually, because there's a point where nobody wants to get in front of your camera anymore because everybody's bored. Like, oh God, it's hard. Like my kids, oh God, like there's a point where literally, my youngest daughter, she would like stand in as a model whenever I was trying out some new lighting thing, and she would be switched on, and then the minute I would change something, she'd be back on her phone. Yeah, I mean, complete and utter boredom with it. But the thing is that when you love what you do and you create something that is really you, and something that you love doing, it's actually not that difficult to bring that to market. Because here's the thing, like I so often have people ask me, especially friends who don't necessarily have had anything to do with photography. They're like, oh, it must be, isn't that like frustrating when, you have to do corporate headshots and like you have to, shoot what other people want, rather than, is that still creative, or is it just a technical exercise, And the truth is that when I get hired to do headshots, they hire me because of what I do. Because
Exactly.
the look that I've created. So at that point, it's not. No, I'm not dancing to anybody else's tune. They've hired me to create what I do, and I happen to love what I do. So is this work? No, it absolutely isn't. It's fun, and and that's the thing. And in a commercial sense, it is fun, but I also get a paycheck at the end of it, which is even better.
Yeah, that's the perfect scenario. But it's an important point, isn't it? Because those people are buying your creative approach and your style of photography. And I remember again in my marketing days, I'd need to appoint a photographer for a certain campaign, for example, that we were doing, and you'd be going through so many portfolios of the photographers, but you're looking all about the style, and the examples that they're given, because you can see that approach, that creative style in the work that they're presenting to you. And then one of those people will get the job based on their creativity. So you're absolutely right. It's and we all see the world in different ways, don't we?
Absolutely, yeah.
That's the remarkable thing about photography, and I can guarantee that, for example, if I'm guiding a group and we're all in the same location and we're all there, probably in a small cluster photographing together, I can guarantee that each and every one will take a different image based on their perspective and their viewpoint, and indeed the type of lens that they've got on, for example. But each, you'd expect in that scenario that everybody comes away with an identical image, and
absolutely.
And we all just see the world so differently, and then that is amazing. Yeah.
And you've mentioned that you're doing guided photography tours. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I do. I work both for a photography trip company, and I also do my own workshops and trips. And that really it's taken me around the world, really, all wildlife focused, and to some amazing locations. So I'm generally guiding maybe between 12 and 14 large trips every year, to countries in Europe, the UK as well, Japan, North America, Central America, for example, Kenya, obviously. So that's always one I really enjoy doing. So yeah, it takes me to all corners of the world, really, and always with a camera, and always being in outdoors and with good people, like-minded people, because the amazing thing is everybody is generally, they've got such different backgrounds. They come from all sorts of walks of life, but the common denominators and the passions are the photography and the wildlife, and that's what brings everybody together. So you'll be amazed, how people bounce off each other. I'm there as basically, as the photographic guide, and there to instruct them and help them achieve the images that they're hoping to get, and give them ideas and show them different functions in their camera to help with creativity, like multiple exposures, for example. But it's amazing to watch them bounce off each other as well, and also get ideas off each other. So it's a really, it's a rewarding part of what I do. I really love that side of it, and I do actually love being with people, even though as wildlife photographers we tend to be quite sort of solitary creatures, really, but I also enjoy being with people too. So yeah, that's basically what a typical guiding year looks like. Yeah.
If there was one tip you could give to somebody who's thinking about starting out in wildlife photography, what would it be?
Oh, that's I would. It's interesting because I'm actually asked that question quite a lot, Kirsten, and especially from younger people, younger photographers, because they're just setting out and that's their dream, and I think it comes down to the what we've been discussing, about having the passion and the determination and the tenacity to do this. If it's possible, if for anybody really, it depends what circumstances people are in. But if they're already working in a different job, for example, I'd always advise, just to build the photography side at the same time as working in the office or wherever they're working, and that is a tough call, because you're doing in effect two jobs, but at least you've got the security of an income from your other job whilst you're building yourself in wildlife photography. Yeah, I would definitely, again, just to summarize, stick to the passion, do it for yourself. Put your work out there. I mean, we haven't mentioned social media, but that is important as a channel, and use it well and use it positively, with a view of being able to just, if you like, put your work out there, get it noticed, but also meet other photographers from all around the world, because that's the remarkable thing of social media. It's brought everybody together, and there are a lot of groups that you can be involved in, to do that. So yeah, it really is a difficult question. I think it depends what stage people are in life, whether they're just starting out and they want to just go into wildlife photography, or whether they're working and wanting to make the jump, which is basically what I did. So but first and foremost is just hold on to that passion, and be happy doing this. Actually put the camera down sometimes as well, because you can learn so much. Wildlife animals will teach you so much about themselves just when you're with them, and they're showing you their normal behaviors, and you can just watch them. And sometimes when we're photographing them, we lose all of that, so go out without a camera and just observe them, learn about them, read about them, talk to experts in the field about them, just choose one or two of your favorite animals and just focus on them and become an expert, and take images throughout the year and over the years. See this as a long-term project, over 5 years, over 10 years. Document those animals and become known for the wildlife photographer who focuses on Dalmatian pelicans, for example, or you know, or whatever it is, whatever the animal is that you really love, you know. So become known for that focus rather than being generalist. So yeah, there's a lot in that, isn't there? Sorry.
That's amazing. Ellie, on that thought, thank you so much for being the guest on this week's Camera Shake podcast. It was an absolutely delightful conversation. Okay, folks, that's it for today. It was awesome having Ellie on the show. And as always, before we go, let me just recommend another episode that I think you like. Check out episode 216 with Matthew Brown, where we talk about capturing amazing landscapes. I'm sure you love it. If you enjoy our content, consider supporting us on buymeacoffee.com/camerashake to help us continue creating and bringing you more exciting episodes. It really does mean the world to us. And for those of you who are listening to the audio version of this podcast, did you know that there's a fully fledged video version over on YouTube with plenty of examples of our guest photography in full Technicolor? All you have to do is go over to YouTube, search for Camera Shake Podcast, and you'll be able to watch all past episodes on there. And if you're already on YouTube, drop us a comment, hit the like button, ring that bell, and share with your friends. Your engagement helps us reach a wider audience all over the world. So thank you for listening and watching. And remember, a new episode drops every Thursday, so make sure you mark that in your calendars. Until next time, keep shaking things up in the world of photography. See you next Thursday.